Thank you, everyone. For those of you who have joined, we're going to make a start on the webinar now. And thank you all for taking time out of your morning to learn more about dispute management, what happens when projects go wrong, and kind of how Arup have addressed this particular area. We've got 4 speakers today in 4 different locations, so hopefully the technology doesn't fail us and everything goes according to plan. My name's Jacob Wardrop. I'm one of the directors at Mail Manager, which is a software solution created by Arup to help companies get control of their email. Delighted to be joined by Rob Horn of Osborne Clarke, who's head of construction and engineering disputes at Osborne Clarke, who are a international legal practice. Rob's got over 25 years of experience in this particular field and is going to be sharing effectively the past, present, and future around construction and engineering disputes. I'm then equally delighted to be joined by 2 of my colleagues, Bradley and Guy, who will be showing you how Arup have addressed this particular area in their business around dispute management, particularly when it comes to organising data and correspondence against projects. In terms of what we're going to cover today, I'm going to be providing a short introduction to this topic and effectively why we've decided to put this webinar on. Rob will then be covering dispute management and avoidance with you. Bradley will be discussing the role of email in disputes, and then we'll be showing you how Arup have helped project teams reduce risk across every single job. In terms of a good place to start is to try and understand what makes people attend these things. We appreciate right now that obviously it's a particularly challenging time, and I'm going to launch a poll, which you should see in a moment, which will just ask people of their reason for attending today. So you should see that just now. So the options there are whether you're reviewing your IT systems, you'd like to hear more about dispute management best practice, or are particularly struggling in this area of email, or alternatively, the last option is if you're just interested in hearing about Arup. So that should pop up on your screens now, which you should see. Very good. Interesting mixed results. Very good. Thank you. So in terms of disputes in construction, the thing which really stuck out to me and why we started covering and delivering content around this area was after reading the Arcadis report. Rob is the expert on this and knows a lot more than myself. But what stuck out to me is that the construction industry for years has effectively suffered some of the same challenges and same causes for disputes. The things which we know about disputes are that they can be particularly costly, and they can be massively debilitating in terms of the amount of time spent trying to address them. So we were very interested in some of the causes, so we'll share this report with you, but some of the causes for disputes around project teams failing to understand how to administer a contract, errors in contract documents, as well as actually sometimes not being able to project teams being unable to lay their hands on the correct information at the right time, as well as that all-important factor, which is human factors. So what stands out in the Arcadis report is the amount of cost and time involved in disputes, but also how the reasons stay the same for a number of years. And Rob will be sharing, I suppose, how potentially the sectors of the construction industry are already taking a more proactive approach to this area rather than kind of waiting for disputes to happen. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Rob Horn, who will take you through some of his learnings. Hello, Rob.
Hi. Hopefully you can all see my screen. I've just shared it with hopefully everyone. I'll also see if I can turn my video on as well. Sorry, I'm just used to keeping video minimized when it's not being used. I found a lot of bandwidth problems over the last couple of weeks. Imagine we're all running short of bandwidth for these sorts of meetings nowadays. I'm going to assume for the moment that this is a C-word free presentation. So say for anyone asking me questions, I'm going to avoid the C word completely. Let's see, right. Okay, so a few things I'm going to cover. Just have a quick look at what do I mean by dispute avoidance and dispute management. Then I sort of broken down 3 time periods that I think are relevant. The first 2, what I've called the Dark Ages and the Age of Enlightenment, sort of bring us up to date and give it a little bit of background to why we are where we are in the construction industry. But I'm going to try and get through that relatively quickly because I want to talk more about the digital future and where I think we're going. Obviously, it's very difficult to look at what we might do in the future if you don't know where we've been and what we're doing at the moment. Then I've got a few conclusions and takeaways and opportunity to ask some specific questions on anything that I've spoken about. So I really want to focus on the latter half of this. So apologies if I rattle through the first half a little bit quickly. Let's start off with a little bit of background. What is it that we're talking about? We talk about avoidance and management of disputes. I think certainly now, even more so, maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago, there was just an acceptance that disputes are part of the industry. They're necessary, they're healthy. They've been here as long as the construction industry's been around. They're part of the tension which holds the industry together. It's how the industry works. It's quite an aggressive, confrontational industry. So what's the problem with having disputes? Disputes are part of what we do. And the bottom line is they're the only way of enforcing the rights and entitlements that the parties have. And legally, there is some truth in that. We can perhaps come around and develop that a little bit more in the following slides. With that little bit of background, the question then is, well, why do you want to manage and avoid then? And I think a couple of these points were picked up by Jacob, but I try and add a little bit more flesh onto that. Everyone talks about disputes being expensive and time consuming, but perhaps people don't appreciate how expensive and how time consuming they can really be. So I'm going to put adjudication to one side for a moment because that's a special beast. But if you look at court proceedings, arbitration, any other formal means of resolving a dispute, my starting point when anyone asks, well, how much is it, is you take 10% of the amount in dispute, and that's about how much your legal cost is going to be. So it's upwards from there. So if you've got a dispute over £1 million, you're going to spend £100,000 to resolve it. You've got £10 million, you're going to spend £1 million to resolve it. And that's a really good rule of thumb, and it starts to give you an idea of how expensive or what numbers you should start having in mind when you talk about resolving disputes. When we talk about time consuming, again, how long does it take to resolve a dispute? You get litigation, arbitration, a year, 2 years before, from the point at which you understand you've got a dispute to the point at which you've got a judgment or an award resolving it. So a huge amount of time, but actually the time consuming bit isn't necessarily in how long it takes to resolve. It's more about the disruption that you get into your business and just how distracting it can be from the day job. Tying up people who should be out working on projects in the office, writing witness statements, explaining what they did 2, 3, 4 years ago is not really what they're there for. Doesn't produce any new money, can be extremely difficult for a business to deal with. I'm not going to go through all of these points, but the other one I'm going to pick up on is disputes are a treadmill. Once you've started a dispute, it's very difficult to stop it again, particularly so when you're in court, even more so in an adjudication, funnily enough. Once you've started, there are very few off-ramps, if I can mix the metaphor, within the dispute process. So the thought that goes into starting the process must be to see it all the way through to the end and not stop midway, because that can be very difficult and very expensive. So quite a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to have formalized disputes. But how do you how do you avoid it? How do you not have those formalized disputes? I think one of the things that we have lacked within the commercial sphere of disputes is a little bit of imagination. We've been very focused on contractual rights and remedies rather than looking at alternatives and possibilities, opportunities. How can you get to win-win opportunities? How can everyone actually be more successful because we've identified a problem? So that's all goes to sort of understanding what the underlying problem is, and really understanding what the true objective is, and being very honest about that. Is the true objective to make as much money as possible? Is the true objective to get out of this contract as quickly as possible because I'm losing money? Whatever those objectives are, you need to be very clear on what it is, because that is the driver to how to manage and avoid the risk of dispute. Probably it's fairly obvious, particularly during a presentation, to say, well, how do you do that? You talk to people, you try to understand their position and your own position, and you evaluate where all of those things are in relation to the true objectives. It is really easy to say, it's really hard to do actually on a live project. So I think the more tools you can build around that, making time to talk, understand, evaluate, the more likely it is you're going to be successful in your avoidance and management techniques. This is a tool that I use quite often, trying to explain to clients why it's important to start dealing with disputes very early. Now, I appreciate you can't see probably all of the detail on there, but the important bit, if I can draw a couple of lines that are visible, is just these bits here. It's the funnel. Well, that didn't work. It's the funneling exercise. So right to the left-hand end of this screen is the earliest point in the project, and right to the right-hand side is the end of a project. Your opportunity for resolving problems narrows continuously because you can't do so much. When you're right at the outset of the project, you could choose not to build the project. Once you've put the foundations in, you might be able to change the nature of the project that the foundations are sitting on, but you can't fundamentally change what it is you're building anymore. By the time you've put the whole building together, your only options really are monetary. So that's the idea, really, is just to understand there is a constant funneling exercise. So the earlier you spot that there might be a problem, the more opportunities, here the vertical, if you like, more opportunities there are to try and resolve, manage, avoid those problems. I think I'm going to go through a few time periods. So I don't know how old anyone is on the call. I'm certainly not going to ask. I was just about old enough to start practicing before adjudication really kicked off. So I started practice around 98 or 96, a little bit before that. So I saw a little bit of what was going on really before adjudication. And it was pretty horrible. There were no easy solutions to anything. And I think because of that, everyone had stopped trying. There were some very effective face-to-face discussions and negotiations, but what we found was everything was left to the last minute because it was just too difficult to deal with. And so the things I wanted to pick up on, particularly in this time period, because it becomes relevant when you look at what we do now, looking into the future, is three things, I suppose. One is what I've identified in that second line in the table as data black holes. So where we just didn't have information, we didn't know what was happening at all. So we had to, I was going to say, make stuff up. We didn't make stuff up. We used all the information to fill in the holes as best you can, which is really making stuff up. That leads you on to having no incentive to try and deal with problems early, because if you don't know there's a problem because you don't have the data, you don't know and don't have the opportunity to assess and address problems early enough. So that's really important as well. And then the last piece is the disjoint, the lack of, because again, coming out of that data black hole, you have an inability for site teams to be able to pass critical information back to head office. So the business end of the machine never really understood what was going on. So I'd say that was what was going on pre-adjudication. And then what I've called it Age of Enlightenment ? Where we are now. We've got adjudication. So we now have dealt with one of those problems. We have an interim solution for how we can deal with problems if we choose to. I think one of the problems that we have is adjudication has become such an easy tool to use that we've stopped thinking about managing and avoiding as much as probably we could do, because we can always just step to adjudication and have our rights resolved. We don't have now so much of a data black hole. I think, and it's interesting for me to do this alongside these guys from Arup, because one of the things that I see at the dispute end is the proliferation of email is fantastic on the one hand in dealing with the data black hole that I mentioned previously, but there is so much information that unless it's managed effectively, you can never find what it is you want. So actually we're in a difficult stage at the moment where we're probably generating more data and more information than we can possibly deal with. And what we need are analytical tools, ways to make that data searching and relevance tracking of information much clearer and cleaner. So a big step forwards from the dark ages pre-adjudication, but a lack of thought, too much information, not enough analysis. I use that as a springboard to look forward to what I've called the digital future, rise of the machines. And this is a great area to talk about because no one knows whether I'm right or wrong, or you know, by the time you've worked out whether I was right or wrong, I'm gone, long gone. So what I've done is just tried to identify a few things that I think are relevant and interesting. Some of them are closer to reality than others. So if we start with something like intelligent analytics, so even if you just take the easy step of emails, now we have good systems that allow comprehensive and intelligent assessment and tracking and filing of emails, which enables those at my end of the dispute and those earlier to manage, track and evaluate problems. So it's really important, and I can't overstress the importance from my perspective of analytics in the future. There is no doubt we're going to have the data and information, and that is coming, it is there. The analytics, getting that right is the only way you can manage and implement any form of dispute avoidance. So without mentioning the C word, I think usually when I talk about this, I spend a little while trying to explain what an exponential curve is and how that works. I suspect we're all reasonably familiar with how exponential curves work at the moment. But I think that's what we're seeing in terms of data explosion. So we're going to see even more information, with even more information being produced by things. So I've called it IoT, Internet of Things, and smartware. So tracking devices attached to plant, machinery, men, materials. So you know where everything is all of the time. The question is, again, going back to my first point, analytics. You need to understand what that all means. Simply knowing where your figure was, what engine revs it was doing throughout an entire day is all very interesting, but doesn't mean anything unless you can analyze it and apply it to something else. There's always lots of talk about single source of truth. Most people will correlate that to blockchain or something similar. That's really important. Again, reinforcing that analytics. Once you've done the analytics, you need to embed it somewhere so that everyone's got the same information, is working to the same set of information. The next is automation of the commercial process, and how do you do that? This is one of those items that I think is a little bit further in the future. I can see it's going to happen. If you get those first three items, so you've got intelligent analytics, you've got the data explosion, you've got the single source of truth, it then actually becomes relatively easy to identify what within all of that information amounts to a claim within the contract, or a breach of the contract, or something that should be notified under the contract. So you automatically pick that up, whether it's through artificial intelligence or something slightly less complicated, it doesn't matter. But the fact is you can draw that out, immediately produce, and you could immediately serve that notice. Now, I'm very hesitant, and it might be, you know, in 15, 20 years' time, there'll be no need for this hesitation. But I'm very nervous of fully automating the commercial process because, again, a point that Jacob made, human dynamics is a really important part of doing business, particularly in construction. It's really difficult, it's really complicated to understand exactly why some things are being done or not being done. So full automation, I think, could be achievable. I personally think it would be a mistake at the moment. It's probably, as I say, 15 to 20 years away before we'll be able to really automate the commercial processes and put to one side or remove the human dynamic within construction process. There's a lot of talk all the time about modern methods of construction. What's that going to do in terms of dispute avoidance and dispute management? Well, if you fundamentally change your supply chain, you've fundamentally changed where the risk lies in your construction process. You may have made it easier to identify what the problem is, so reduce the risk on identification, but almost certainly you've equally increased the risk of consequence, because changing a warehoused off-site method of construction is fantastically more difficult to adjust than giving a site instruction, for example, to change the way bricks are being laid. If you have to go back to a production line and make an alteration, it has a massive consequence. The risk flagging software, I think, is probably the first step towards automation of commercial process. Now, I've seen some prototypes in the market where artificial intelligence is being used to identify and attribute keyword searches effectively to all communication that's going on a project, identify keywords across a business that tend to lead to risks and potentially to disputes as well. And when those keywords appear with a certain amount of regularity, it then becomes a flagged issue for someone to look into. I think that's really important, really interesting. So we've taken away the human dynamic, not from the resolution process, but from the identification process. I think that's really important because it stops the lack of disclosure between the site team and the board, and also stops anyone being able to hide problems, which is unfortunately a problem that we see across a lot of sites. And then finally, this point on greater knowledge, more easily disseminated, goes to the same point. Once you've got all of that data and you've got the analytics and you've digitized everything that you need to, actually passing that information on, not in its raw form, but in an analyzed form through dashboards and through proper risk analyzing tools, is actually relatively easy. Again, going to that point of ensuring that the whole project team understand exactly what's going on. Just end with a few conclusions and a few takeaway points for people to think about. What we need to learn from the past first. What do we need to not do now and in the future? I think we need to stop distancing the boardroom from projects. It is dangerous. There is a role for both project teams and boardrooms in making important strategic decisions. I think that gets lost a lot of the time. Records are great, but analysis is now the key driver for everything. We don't need more records, frankly. We need better analysis of the records that we've got. We need more active involvement, more thought at the early stages of disputes and differences, problems, risks being flagged on site and addressed rather than hidden, buried away. We need to bring the supply chain with us on this journey towards digitization, towards production of information, to make sure when we produce a single source of truth, there's a single source that everyone buys into. More importantly than any of that, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. You really need to take advice from people who know what they're doing and people who understand the full range of different ways of approaching different problems, from very, very early risk analysis through to dispute avoidance through to actually pursuing a dispute if necessary at the end. And I think once we've learned those things from the past, just keeping an open mind in terms of how computers and how that machine generation and machine generated information is going to help us. I think we need to keep an open mind as to how that works. Don't be too cynical, but equally don't expect too much from it too quickly. I think the single source of truth is a massive leap of faith by everyone, and we just have to appreciate that. No one wants to sign up to a machine telling them what their entitlement is to cash. It's just too important for a business. We will probably get there at some point, but it's going to take a while, and we need to find an easy way to have small steps across that divide rather than taking that huge leap of faith. By far and away, talking is still the best method of management and avoidance. You can't understand what is going on unless you're talking to people, and we need to do that. I think it's a skill that has been in decline in the construction industry, particularly since we've had adjudication. People are too quick to press an adjudication button rather than talk to people. I think that's something that just needs to change. And then finally, just risk management, dispute avoidance is a different skill set. It takes a different type of person. We don't need someone to do that risk analysis and dispute avoidance piece who is either too heavily involved in the project and therefore has a position to protect, or is overly qualified as an engineer, an architect, a quantity surveyor, a lawyer. It doesn't matter. What you need is that broad understanding of how all of the pieces in the jigsaw come together to make the nice picture at the end, rather than a bunch of random pieces. A little page about me. The one thing that I'd pick up on that page, you can read at your leisure. One of the books that I've helped write, Global Construction Success, picks up on a lot of these points and talks a lot about how to manage projects. So definitely recommend getting hold of that and having a read if you feel like you want to know more about how you manage, analyze, and avoid disputes. So that was a really quick run through dispute management, dispute avoidance, the sorts of issues that you see, the sorts of things that are likely to happen in the future. This is the big pause, particularly when we do webinars, of any questions.
First of all, thank you very much for that, Rob. Excellent kind of coverage of the topic. I wish there was a round of applause sound you could ring out in Zoom, but that isn't an option. So yeah, as Rob mentions, if you've got any questions, there's a Q&A button in the Zoom window, and if you've got any questions at all, you can put them in. There's one question which has come in, Rob, which is what risk analytical tools do you recommend?
That's a really interesting one. My personal view is I don't think there are any particular tools that are so vastly different that they are working better than understanding your projects, understanding what it is you're doing and working on at the moment. So I don't think right now there are any products that I would recommend as an overall package. It's just not there yet.
Very good. I think the kind of real thing which comes across from what you're saying is that businesses need a strategy for this, rather than hoping there's like a single silver bullet to solve every single dispute, including kind of human factors, analysing data, as well as organising themselves around project information. I was particularly interested in what you mentioned around boardrooms being a bit detached from project information. I can see another question has come in before we move on to my colleague Bradley, which is how significant has the implementation of BIM been to potentially help alleviate disputes?
Okay, so this is one of those questions that I try and avoid because it usually makes me unpopular. I've seen BIM work reasonably well. I've seen, but more often I've seen BIM cause more problems than it's solved, mostly because the BIM model's been inadequately prepared in the first place. It's been rushed to market. It's not taken on board proper input from other people. So I can see massive benefits from a proper approach to BIM and proper integration of a BIM model, but I don't see it being done. Now, I accept that, you know, I only tend to see projects that have gone or are likely to go wrong. So I have quite a jaundiced view of the market. But those projects that I see that have utilized a BIM model, the BIM model has not helped at all. Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, well, excellent. Rob, stay with us because I'm sure there'll be more questions which come up, which we'll cover at the end. If anyone has kind of any other questions at all on any of what we're talking about today, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. So I'm just going to take over presenting now and pass on to my colleague Bradley, who will talk through the role email plays in disputes, and I suppose linking to what Rob's discussing, particularly when we're talking about how to organise and collate information together.
Jacob and Rob, thanks very much for that. So yes, onto the role of email in construction disputes. So one myth in the industry is that emails are not legally binding, and that, well, that certainly isn't true, and it can often make business responsible for their actions. And in the case of a dispute or a litigation issue on a project, emails as a result can sort of act like, well, mini contracts. So people don't often realize how important emails are until they essentially have to go back and find it. And whether this is receiving a critical document during the project or having to go back on anything a few years ago to see who was speaking to who authorized this or that. And now email is the biggest form of communication on a project. However, it's the one thing that quite often people tend to manage differently, as well as legal disputes as well. So if, for example, you have a organized project manager who's keeping really good records, it can really help project disagreements be resolved before it actually gets to that legal claim stage. So on the screen, just a few of the different ways of managing email. And now a lot of companies have a certain structure in managing their emails and the correspondence, you know, documents and drawings, and in that they're often stored on a server or the cloud, but we often find that everyone manages information in different ways. So for example, some may set up their own subfolders in their own Outlook. You may have a public folders setup structure that everyone files into. Some may create their own rules, and others may just leave things in their inbox. But what's important is not necessarily the email itself, but the business information that's actually in that email. And what can happen is that when staff go to find where their information should be, well, sometimes it just isn't. And many businesses feel that if it was up to their staff to file emails, then they or simply wouldn't do it, and they wouldn't do it consistently. And the business is then at risk, as important information can just be stuck in people's inboxes, and then there's space taken up on servers due to multiple copies of the same email with attachments sat in different inboxes. And so what we find is that when emails are consistently organized across the company and important correspondence is managed in the same way, it ensures there's no risk of information becoming lost, and you're wasting less time day to day within Outlook. So I might be right in assuming that some of you have probably been in this position before, whether you're asking or mentioning the following statements, or maybe even been on the receiving end of them, or maybe even both. But what's important is that when information is managed consistently, we don't get into these scenarios where people aren't asking each other, when was this agreed, or you never sent us this information, or just forward me the email. It's really important that these statements are avoided so that your day-to-day life can be cohesive and just managed consistently there. So this is where Mail Manager comes in. So Mail Manager was developed by Arup about 10 or so years ago because they knew they had a real issue surrounding email. Now, picture 16,000 employees, everyone managing information in their own different way. And people were wasting time trying to find information on a day-to-day basis. There was no structure or standardization. And the company was presented with a lot of risk of information becoming lost or irretrievable. This goes back to what we were mentioning earlier about disputes, and there was loads of them arising, and people weren't able to access information on a day-to-day basis. So Arup thought, picture if their project teams could find any email on their project in seconds, without people having to spend time filing. And so Arup looked around at what solutions were available, and they couldn't find they're happy with. And so what they did is they built their own, and they created Mail Manager. So Mail Manager was not intentionally created to be sold, but because we were working with a number of different companies with fairly similar issues, they became quite interested in Mail Manager. And so about 4 years ago, Arup set up 28 Hands, who myself, Guy, and Jacob will represent, with the sole purpose of promoting, managing, and continuing to develop Mail Manager. And now, Mail Manager today is used by over 55,000 users across the AEC sector and just about over 2,000 companies worldwide. Okay, on your screen, a few of the customers that currently use Mail Manager at the moment. Now, the sectors vary. What they have in common, however, is that they're all project-based businesses. They work in high-risk environments, always looking at technology as a way of improving their day-to-day routine. So now, on the screen, a few of the problems that we solve here with Mail Manager. And now, for you guys, all of these might apply, perhaps maybe one or two apply, it depends. So what you can see on the screen here is a poll. And now we want to see what issues adhere most to you. So I'll just allow you just to take a moment to choose which one of the challenges are impacting the system most. The lack of control, which is, especially if you're a director and you need to have visibility on company correspondence, and that can be quite difficult if people are managing emails in their own different way. Project managers being uninformed when making decisions. This can especially come about if information isn't being standardized and is not being filed consistently, because especially project managers need to have that visibility on projects to be able to avoid those disputes that we mentioned earlier. Risk of losing sensitive information, certainly one of the ones that adheres most to what we were mentioning earlier, in that if information is managed differently, it increases that risk of not being able to retrieve information. And in a worst case scenario, you can even fall into that data black hole that Rob was mentioning earlier. Poor visibility over project correspondence, sort of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Staff being overwhelmed by email overload, information being locked in people's inboxes. And now, if emails aren't filed consistently, and then if they're being clogged up in people's inboxes, then not only are you essentially creating storage issues within your own Outlook, but you can't access the important emails that you need because it's not in an accessible location. And then staff inconsistent with filing information. That sort of crosses over to what we were mentioning earlier there.
Really interesting results coming in. Thank you to those of you who are voting. Interesting that over half of the people on this webinar are concerned regarding information being locked in individual inboxes. One thing which we see in the industry a lot is that if you've got 5 kind of people on a project with 5 inboxes, there's 5 black holes of stuff which you might need to rely on in the future, which is exactly what brought Arup to this point. Going to thank you, Bradley. Really excellent summary. We're going to pass over to my colleague Guy to show practically how Arup have addressed this in their business.
Thank you, Jacob. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see my outlook there. So I'm going to show you first what Mail Manager is, and it resides here in the ribbon. It's a simple add-in. It's these 3 buttons and these 3 drop-downs. I am about to show you how we file emails using Mail Manager, how we organize our inbox day to day, and then I'll take you to the search tool to show you how you can avoid a dispute before it arises by finding an email that you might not have been included on that was sent a while ago with ease. So as Bradley mentioned earlier, here at Arup, we had project teams working in different ways. We had some organizing their inboxes using public folders, others using Outlook rules, others just doing it using normal Outlook folders. And no one was doing it wrong, they were just doing it differently. And so Arup needed some consistency. So I'll open this email from Aisha. Now, I've already spoken to Aisha and I don't need to reply to it. After reading it, I might move on to the next email. And the danger of this being locked in my inbox remains. It's not always immediately clear which emails are important, which ones you might need to rely on in the future. So I'll close it. And a prompt comes up, and this is what gets people filing. This is what drives consistency, turns it into a habit, ensures those people that need to see it will be able to. Mail Manager uses a very simple piece of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and it's clever. It learns where I file my emails from different people, tells me where they should go. It's also looking at the subject line and the body of the email to see if it can pick up any project information. On this occasion, it's recognized that I work on ACOM with Aisha, so I'm going to file this away. That email goes to 2 places. Now, one is Mail Manager, so we'll be able to find it later. The second place is a folder called Filed Items. That is so that you've got full functionality within Outlook. It hasn't disappeared, but we like to keep your inbox streamlined, like mine, as a to-do list, as opposed to a filing cabinet. Now, another key feature of Mail Manager is how it deals with outgoing emails. Typically, companies don't file sent emails. You have to be a really dedicated filer to send an email, go into your sent items, drag it onto your server. More often than not, the emails that you send are more important than the ones you receive, particularly if you're giving advice or instruction on a project. So let's go with Joe. He's asking me if it's all right for him to proceed with plans. I'm going to tell him to go ahead. Now, I've just typed 2 words, seemingly unimportant, but I might need to rely on this in a month. I might need to rely on it in a year. So Arup thought, what if we can file by replying? I'll send the email. Prompt comes up again. This time it's a different folder, different project, different person. I'll send and file. That files the email from Joe and my response to filed in one without giving it any thought. Now, back to Aisha, who I'm working on ACOM with, just as an example of the AI. She hasn't mentioned ACOM once. She hasn't mentioned any project numbers, but Mail Manager will pick up that's what we're working on together. I could file by right-clicking and go like that, or I could select it and file up here. What we found with these manual steps is that people might not file, which is why we developed the prompt. In regards to disputes, future claims, our clients can rest assured that emails are filed as they come in and go out, and no longer are project teams at Arup working in different ways. It gives uniformity. I'll now take you to the search tool. It's this magnifying glass up here. When I speak to clients, they say this is the part of Mail Manager that they'd miss the most if it wasn't around. What we've got here is a Google-like search for your project emails. Typically, companies have only been able to search their own emails in their own inbox, and this is different. It's a helicopter view. If you would look at the bottom left-hand corner, I've got about 490,000 emails that have been filed in my company. Some I'm involved in, the majority I'm not, and that's across multiple projects. Let's say you had to find an email that mentioned a specific word. If I type in earthwork, it pulls up 17 emails out of 490,000. The search has been tested, works on the functionality that can search through 1 million emails in 2 seconds. It should never take more than a couple to find what you're looking for. But earthwork's a very specific term. So let's look for a more generic email. I don't know much about the one I need to find to avoid this dispute. I know that it was sent in the last year, so I'm going to change the date range at the top. We are down to 128,000 emails. I know that it was about an invoice, so I'm going to type that word in. Now we've got 15,000 emails that were sent in the last year and mentioned that word. I know there was an attachment, so I'm going to click yes. Down to just under 5,000. I know the end of the gentleman's name who was involved in this correspondence, so I'm going to put Shire in between. And there we have it. You see, with limited information and a few simple steps, I was able to find this email with relative ease. You might want to, or you might well have to, one day, find all the emails on any given project. Now you're filing against all projects, you can do this. So into the location, I will put ACOM, one of our clients. For you guys watching, that would be a project. So this is all the interaction between us and ACOM. For you, it would be all the interaction between you and the people involved in that project. 1,200 emails, give or take. All I'm interested in is finding out what Georgina was talking about, because she was the one involved in this dispute. So I'll type her name in. And now we've got all the interaction between Georgina and ACOM. You can see what emails they've been involved in. I know there's an attachment in the one I'm looking for, so I'm just going to click yes. It gives a level of project visibility that wasn't necessarily available beforehand, because you can see all the emails on any given project rather than just your own. Now, when projects go as planned, all is well. When they go wrong, emails become critical. The search tool has the capability to turn a highly stressful situation into a far calmer one. Really helps you find those mini contracts that Bradley referred to earlier. I'm now going to show you a relatively new feature. It's called the social map. It'll take a few seconds to load up. In the context of a project, it gives you a visual representation of who the loudest voices are. So for ACOM, this is a map of all those 1,200 emails. The bigger the box, the more conversations, but I need to get a little bit more specific. So I'm going to type the word renewal into here. If this was a project, you might type the word contract in, see every time that word was mentioned in an email. Once again, it'll just take a little moment. And here we have it. Instantly, I know that in regards to renewals, I need to speak to John first and foremost. Stephanie and Reese would also be a big help. It's not something you'd use every day by any means, but when you need it, it is useful. And that concludes what I was planning on showing you with the prompt and search. Thank you for your time and your attention, and I'd welcome any questions, as would Jacob and Brad.
Thanks, Guy. There's been one question which has come in around mobile filing, and obviously we know that most people, when we're out on the road at the moment, probably don't file any emails at all. If any businesses are in a different position to that, then feel free to put it in the chat box. But it would be useful to cover how we help people file emails remotely, and how they continue to be able to find them.
Sorry, you'd like me to answer that one, Jacob?
Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry. So with mobiles, you file as you do already. So you drag and drop emails across the folders on your phone, regardless of whether you're using iOS or Android. And with Mail Manager, you have these drop folders here, the ones with the asterisk next to them. These are the folders most used by the individual, and they'll appear on your phone. I've got 8, I think, but you can have up to 50. So you file as you usually would on your phone into these drop folders, and then when you get back to your laptop or your PC, you open it up, and Mail Manager automatically migrates those emails to Mail Manager. It gives you full functionality on your phone. And we've got the filed items folder. If you remember, I mentioned it earlier. Everything that I've sent and received and filed resides in that folder. So you can see all the conversations you've had on your phone as well through that. I hope that answers that okay.
Very good. Thanks for that, Guy. The next question which has come in is, does Mail Manager require you to file every email in your inbox? What about various newsletters and other non-project related emails which you might want to hang on to, but not, aren't necessarily project related?
Great question. So we do have clients who choose to force file their staff file absolutely everything because they want everything to be kept safe. My user preferences aren't set like that, and I have a bit of flexibility, if you will. So if I was emailing Brad about lunch, we'll call it a remote lunch, I don't need to share this. No one else in my project team needs to see it. So I've got a couple of options. I could put that into my personal filing location. By default, everyone gets a personal folder. My CEO can't access my personal folder in the way that I can't access my CEO's important documents. So I could put it in there, no one else would see it. This time though, I'm just going to send only, and that won't get filed.
In answer to the question from Gary in terms of can you restrict access to sensitive emails, i.e. themes or claims? Great question. And yes, Mail Manager mirrors the permissions that you already have existing on your server at the moment. So if you do have any sensitive information that can't be accessed by other staff, for example, I won't be able to access Guy's payroll information, for example, because I'm not permitted to view that due to the permissions on our server. So Mail Manager just simply mirrors any existing permissions you currently have there at the moment.
Thanks, Bradley. Just to, I suppose, to support Guy's answer around having to, being asked to file emails. This does represent a slight change in thinking, because for most businesses, it's easier not to file than it is to file. Whereas with Mail Manager, it's easier to file than those few cases where you've got something which you potentially don't need to. You still can. You can file it into a personal area, and you don't lose access to that. It's still in Outlook, so you can refer back to it. But we want filing to become a habit in the company, and you to be able to go onto a project and see everything there. And you can only do that if everybody's filing consistently. So it's easier to file now than it is to not file. There's been another question which has come in, which is, how long does Mail Manager take to get set up? We have thousands of emails. Great question. Many people have hundreds of thousands of emails. Probably lots of people on this webinar have tens of thousands of emails. We've got a number of bulk filing options which we can go through with you to help help ease the setup process. All of our clients set Mail Manager up, and within a few days, they've got their projects in Mail Manager, and their historic emails are typically there as well. The actual setup process takes less than well, typically somewhere between 2 to 4 hours. So within 2 to 4 hours time, you could be set up and all of your staff filing their emails more consistently. A question which is coming from Susan Rose, which is, can you take the information from Mail Manager and put it into the client folder on our server? Well, yes, that's I suppose how the solution is designed is if Mail Manager files the information wherever you want it to go. So if you want the information to go into a client folder or into a correspondence folder, then that's where it will go in real time. So you're not waiting for people to get to the end of a project, end of a week, and file their emails. As Guy is going through this and filing emails through the prompt, they're going to that folder on the server. Because I'm sure lots of you have gone to a correspondence folder or a client folder and just discovered it's empty.
If I might add to that, Jacob, yeah, Mail Manager is a bridge between individual inboxes and a server. The search tool that I showed you was so quick because it's searching a cached index. It's just scanning the content of the email, the sender, the recipient, the time it was sent. The physical emails are saved in their native format of MSG file on your server, on your cloud server, wherever you want them to be. And that's important because it means we don't change any information in the email. We don't host any of your data. It's all within your company infrastructure, how you want it to be saved.
Now, another question which has come in is around the duplication of emails, because I'm sure everyone has colleagues who go a bit CC happy and end up CCing the world and his wife to an email. So maybe a summary of what Mail Manager does in that scenario.
Yeah, sure. So when an email gets filed with Mail Manager, it gets given a code. It gets stamped with a unique code. That code is the date it was sent and the time, right down to the second. I'm just showing you it on my own server now. So these are emails that I've filed using Mail Manager. They got stamped with the date it was sent and the time, right down to the second, the name of the sender, and the subject line, the first 40 characters. That eliminates duplication because that's always unique to that email. So if me, Brad, Jacob and Rob all got sent the same email at the same time, and we all filed it away using Mail Manager, it would look like we'd all filed it when in fact only one copy got saved. Saves about a third on storage.
Any other final questions at all before we move to a close? We'll just give it one minute. Okay, so I'm just going to take over the screen, Guy. So if you just want to press stop sharing.
Yep.
So in terms of why Mail Manager, you've seen a really good summary from both colleagues there. What businesses have within a day of using Mail Manager is an end to staff just doing their own thing with emails, because for years we've just accepted that, oh, email is, we've got loads of it and we don't really need to put any control around it. It's completely fine and it feels familiar to us, so it doesn't feel like we're wasting time. Businesses who use Mail Manager, who can get their staff to a point where their inbox is a to-do list than a filing cabinet, and have got more visibility, not less, more visibility to information, typically save somewhere between 2 to 3 hours per fee earner per week. The ability to find any conversation on any project is really crucial, because if any of you have ever had to go back and find an email either in your own Outlook, but even worse if it's from someone else, and even worse still if they've left the company, it's massively difficult. The theme for today is risk, and that's a big driver for all of our project-based businesses investing in Mail Manager, because it certainly goes some way to helping towards that. I mean, thinking about Rob's point around data explosion, I think there's definitely been an email explosion, and pretty much I'm sure sort of 99% of people on this webinar would maybe not look forward to opening up their inbox when they get back from holiday. How Mail Manager helps businesses is, if you've got 1,000, 100,000 emails on a project, you've got them in one place so you can find the 10 to 20%, which can sometimes often be worth a significant cost to the business. In terms of the kind of summary and takeaways from today, appreciate this is a really challenging time for everyone at the moment, both on a number of fronts, but to get things done as well. So what we're doing is we're going to be running a number of these webinars to really help provide some useful and meaningful value and content to our audience, but also offering a free trial of Mail Manager. We know that now everybody's working remotely. They're going to need more visibility and not less. It's harder to just go over to your colleague and ask them to forward you over something, and we're probably going to be doing a lot more chasing around for information. So we're offering everyone who's attending this webinar a 2-month free trial of Mail Manager, which allows you to A, test the solution, but B, it's just something which really helps. I mean, we can't literally, guys in our app can't imagine life without using Mail Manager, particularly when you're out of the office and you're working with 4 people, but we're not all in the same room. So we'll send some details of that. That's absolutely, there's no commitment or obligation kind of to doing it. We think it will just help people work during this time where we're not all in the same place. We'll also send details of Rob's book as well, because I think I'm sure there'll be lots of you who are interested in that. But hopefully today's has provided some value and has got you to really think about dispute management within your own company. And if there's any further questions, we'll sort of look forward to further conversations with you. But thank you, Rob, Guy, and Bradley, and all of you who attended today.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.